Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Platform Enterprise, the show that platforms the projects and visions of people all over the world working hard to make their impact a positive one. I'm your host, Rachel Donald, and today I'm thrilled to announce that I've just launched the Platform Enterprise newsletter, a home for the stories that matter. See, here's the thing. We have just 1 decade to solve the climate crisis. And in that time, we've also got to save democracy, limit big tech, sanction the market, and elect politicians who are actually willing to adequately tax the billionaires. Even though these problems are obviously connected, they are too often treated as separate crises, which means things aren't getting better. The Platform Enterprise newsletter is an attempt to report on what connects these crises by platforming stories underreported by a reactive news cycle. Through original reporting and analysis, I hope to create a clearer picture of the global state of affairs. The story published each week will be an investigation inspired by the interviews shared on this podcast. For example, after speaking with Lisa Lux last week about the microeconomy she's creating in Beirut, I investigated Lebanon's poverty crisis and found out that the UN's proposal for a solidarity tax on Lebanon's wealthiest has been ignored, despite over half of the population living in poverty. You can read the full story by going to stories.platformenterprise.com. Don't forget to subscribe to get the weekly report and hit subscribe to this podcast too. On that note, the podcast and newsletter will always be free. Writing reviews and sharing are a great support, and thank you to everyone who has done so. If you enjoy the content and have the means, please consider getting a paid subscription to the newsletter, which will enable me to keep sharing the stories that matter and interviewing people who are genuinely trying to make a difference. One of those people is today's guest, Alina Kilpatrick. Alina is an asylum lawyer based in the US who helps people crossing the US-Mexico border reunite with their loved ones and fight to stay in the United States. Alina actually started practicing asylum law after Trump's victory in 2016 because she knew people crossing the border would need more help than ever. And during our conversation, she really details how the plight of asylum seekers became subject to cruelty and injustice under the Trump administration. Considering this is the first day of Biden's presidency, if you are listening to this podcast on the day it comes out, this is a real eye-opener as to what we can expect will change for the good now that Trump is out of office. I found this conversation really educational and harrowing. So I urge you, if you learned something, please share it. I imagine we all know people who need to hear it. So, Alina, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Lovely to speak with you. Why don't you just introduce yourself and what you do for people that don't know you?
Well, my name's Alina Kilpatrick, and I'm an asylum lawyer in Richmond, Virginia, in the United States. And I work in cooperation with a nonprofit. So what I do is I try to help people who are seeking asylum in the United States stay in the United States and not get sent back to their countries where they may very well die.
Right. Okay. So would this primarily be at the border then, or do you have clients from all around the world?
Well, I have clients primarily from what we call the Northern Triangle, which is Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And my clients have gotten through the border. So I'm not on the border. I'm not in those detention centers. My clients have miraculously gotten through that hump and are now in deportation proceedings here in the United States in Trump's immigration courts.
Okay.
So that's what I do.
Okay, back up a little bit. So they get through that process at the border and get into the United States only to be put back into deportation facilities.
So American immigration is it's so super fucked up. So what these people have to do is they have to get out of their countries, get up through Mexico, which is super dangerous. The rates of kidnapping and extortion are very, very high. My female clients will go get shots of Depo-Provera, before they leave their countries because they just expect to be raped. They just expect it.
Oh
Um,
wow. What is Depo-Provera?
it's that shot that you get. It's a birth control shot that you get that it's like a birth control for 3 months as
Yeah, the
opposed to
injection. Right.
the injection, right? As opposed to taking pills. So they go and they get their shot, and then they go on this horrible, horrible trip, and then they cross the border. Now, right now, right now, today, so we're recording this in November of 2020, right after the election. So right now, this minute, um, today, this is not happening because today, number one, two massive hurricanes just hit the Northern Triangle. Um, so that's impacting the region. And number two, it's very hard to get through the US border right now because Trump has shut it down due to COVID. So what I'm
Okay.
describing is historically what my clients have been through, who the people who I'm helping now, this is their journey. So they go up through Mexico. They try to avoid the organized crime elements that are in Mexico. They try to avoid Mexican immigration, which has its own problems with corruption. And if somehow or another you can get through that, it's just like this crazy board game. I feel like it's like this crazy board game where like, oh, you landed on get kidnapped by Zetas. Um,
Like the worst version of Monopoly.
you have to you have to telephone your relative in your home country and have them wire $3,000 to this particular person in order to get you out. And
Oh
then
God.
you will get a white card. And with your white card, you will have safe passage. I'm so not making this up.
Oh
This
my
is really what
God.
happens. So that if you get nabbed by another group of Zetas, like slightly north of where you were, you can show them your card and be like, "Hey, I already paid you guys," and they'll be like, "All right, keep going." That
Oh my
really
God.
happens. That really happens. So after getting through that part of the board game, if you get to the U.S. border, um, then there's like another bad part of there's another bad square on the board that you can land on, and you either are allowed through or you are put in this ridiculous program called um, the Migrant Protection Protocols, or Wait in Mexico. And again, this is more historical, like over the past year, like not what is happening this day, because this day, today, November 2020, everything's just a giant cluster, and it changes from day to day, quite honestly. So some of my clients have had to wait in Mexico for their court hearings in places that are ridiculously dangerous, like Tijuana. Tijuana is known internationally for how ridiculously dangerous of a city it can be. So my clients wait in Tijuana and they're told to show up at the border tower at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And then they're put on a bus and taken to the immigration court. Well, I had one of my clients, she and her children were going from the camp, the refugee camp, to the place where she was supposed to be to present herself. And she got mugged. And so all of her papers and documents that she was supposed to present
Oh
were stolen,
no.
and she couldn't even get, like, yeah. So another,
Oh no.
another bad square you can land on. You got mugged in Tijuana.
Yeah.
So if by the grace of God you are able to get through the border, it is because usually it's because you passed a credible fear interview. And a credible fear interview is usually done on the phone and, with an asylum officer. And the purpose of that interview is to decide if that individual has an objectively reasonable fear of um, going back? Like,
Oh, hang
is your
on.
asylum case viable?
I thought fear was going to be an acronym for something. Like
No, it's
actually the
actually like real
fear
fear. It's actually
interview.
like real fear. Are you
Oh,
really afraid to go back to your home country? And I mean, is basically what they're looking for is to see if it's humanly possible for them to have a viable asylum case. And
wow.
they're checking to make sure, to the extent possible, that they are who they say they are.
Right.
So, for many of my clients, that was their journey. But there have been some very nutty processes along the way. Like there was the whole family separation fiasco, which is still going on to some extent because we don't know where many of those children's parents are. I represent a few families who went through that process. One of my one of my families had mom crossed first, and mom was pregnant, very very pregnant, so they let mom go because they didn't want to risk mom giving birth in detention because they'd have to pay for that. And then
Oh.
dad and 7-year old crossed, and they took 7-year old away from dad, and then they told the 7-year old that his dad left him because he didn't like him anymore.
You're joking.
No, this is it, like the active cruelty with some of these border patrol officers is incredible.
Was
It's
that
it's so
meant
spect it's so spectral. Like on the same by the same token, like they can also be like the most humane people and rescue people from dying on the one end and be like these amazing heroes. And on the other end, the same people are can be ob- just objectively and actively cruel. So
so
this
that was meant to be some kind of joke
yeah,
or like
yes,
for their own
they were just
amusement.
fucking around with this little child. And
Jesus.
he was, after being in his cage for a little bit, he was taken to a faith-based like children's home. So a lot of the organizations that run these sort of, they're kind of like orphanages, but they're not, these homes for these children on the border, where these children just sort of have to wait to be reunified with a relative who's not in custody or wait to be sent back. These are faith based programs, a lot of them. Um, and so I work in cooperation with a church. So I had to tell this. So he's freaked out by churches because because he associates anything that's remotely church-like with the place that he was kept from his dad. I'm like, no, here when kids come to this church, they're allowed to go back with their mommy and daddy. So after we talk, I promise you'll be allowed to go home with your mommy and daddy, and it'll be okay. Um, and then he just kind of looked at me funny, like, I don't know if you're lying, you crazy white woman, but
Oh my
we played for a
God.
while, and then he was allowed to go home. Like I
Oh
didn't
my
even really
God.
like talk to him much. I just like we just played and let him go home.
How
And then
long how
he
long was he separated from his father for?
Um, about 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
And
That's a really
and
long time for a
for
7-year-old.
seven, yeah, that's a long time. And then
Yeah.
he ended up getting reunified with his mother. It was just this, and then his father came later. It was this whole thing. And then we had to go to immigration court. And immigration court is like, there are guards there and they have weapons and they're in uniform. And so he's terrified of anybody who's in uniform.
Mm.
So, interestingly, the guards at most of the immigration courts are contractors and they don't work directly for the federal government. So, I pulled this one aside who's like my buddy, and I was like, look, I have this kid. He was in a cage and he's totally going to freak the fuck out about coming here. And I need you to help me out. And tell him, like, come over and meet him and tell him that he's going to walk out the door. And he was totally cool. Like he came and he met him and he chatted. Was like, yeah, you know what? You're gonna go in there, and I promise, like your mom and your dad are gonna be with you, and your lawyer's gonna be with you, and you're gonna walk right back out of here when the judge is through, okay? And then he gave the kid a high five and he smiled and he shook his hand, and then the kid was fine. Like, but it's like it took some major interventions just like to get the kid not to freak out about going to court.
Well, I mean, of course, like you take any child into a very strange and extremely formal setting where people are speaking in a foreign language and you haven't seen anybody you know in 3 weeks. I mean, that's going to be distressing for anybody, let alone a child that's just made the journey, the harrowing journey that
Yeah,
you just described up through the Northern Triangle. It's absurd
yeah.
to think that anybody would be mentally fine with that.
Yeah, well, by the time we went to court, it was probably about 8 or 9 months since he had been released, but he was still very trepidatious. I mean, he had a lot of, even after that amount of time, and he was in therapy, he
Um,
was still a little scared. But you know, we our plan went great, and then afterwards, we um, we went to breakfast in Washington D.C. And what's amazing is like even though Trump lives in the White House, so many of
mm,
my clients want to see the White House. So for with a lot of them, this was before the pandemic. For a lot of them, I would bring them with me on the train. So it's about a 2 hour train ride from Richmond to Arlington, and Arlington is just outside of Washington, D.C. And in the area in which I live, which is Virginia, the immigration court for Virginia and West Virginia is in Arlington. So we go to the train, then we go to the metro, and we go to the immigration court. And, you know, my clients have very different reactions to that whole like process. You know, some of them get on the metro and they're like super freaked out, and some of them were like, "This is so cool."
mm.
And if there's time before our train returns, then I'll take them into the city and you know, show them something. Um, if, as I said, if there's time. My favorite train story was I took this mom and child. The mother was a journalist in Honduras, and she had a child who was born like within days of my niece Salome. So he was 5 years old at the time when we went, and was so excited about the train that he like didn't sleep for 2 days because he was going on, you know, because we were taking the train ride. And it's really early in the morning. It's dark because we have to get the train at 6 o'clock to get to Arlington by 8. And he's, you know, telling me he's like pointing to the top of the train, and he's like, "Well, aren't we going up there?" I'm like, "No, honey, we're not riding on the top of the train. Oh God, I got us a ticket. We all got tickets.
Wow.
We're riding inside the train where it's warm." And he's like, "Really? So you get to go
Oh.
inside the train? That's so cool." And then for the
Oh.
entire train ride up there, he was standing by the window. He was just standing by the window, for 2 hours, just standing by the window looking out. And then on the way back, he just crashed.
Oh my God.
We
This is
went at race.
I have so many questions for you because I mean
Sure.
it's not very often that you get to speak with somebody who is working with this problem and trying to help people and knows the reality of it because obviously like the whole border control and immigration process has kind of really come under scrutiny in the past 4 years during the Trump administration,
Hmm.
because it was kids in cages, this kind of, lexicon surrounding the immigration process. But obviously, family separation was actually, administered under the Obama administration. That's when that policy started being.
In to some extent. So let me explain the difference between the Obama family separation and the Trump family
Please do.
separation. All right. So family separation has existed. And I can't tell you exactly when it started, but yes, it did happen in Obama. But the purpose and intent were different. So, one of the responsibilities of the border officers is to make sure that the children are not victims of human trafficking and to make sure that the person who purports to be mom really is mom. And so if you are going through the border as an immigrant and you cannot prove that the child is yours, like you don't have a birth certificate for the child, or if you are not the child's parent, if you're the child's aunt or the child's grandmother, then there's going to be a problem. And
Right.
that dates back. And that's because the border patrol, I mean, has a duty, I mean, under international law. I mean, it goes back to like the Hague Convention and stuff. Like, you can't bring kids in who aren't yours. So, under Obama, they did separate families, and but they didn't put little kids in cages, number one. But when they separated children from the family members who brought them, it was because number one, there was a question as to whether or not mom or dad really was mom or dad. Or two, the family member who brought the child was not a parent, and then the Office of Refugee Resettlement had to go through and try to find an actual parent. So
Right.
that was what was going on back then. Okay,
So
so yeah, it did happen.
that policy was only enforced in order to verify if the child was a victim of human trafficking or,
That was the
to
major
assess
purpose
the
of it. That was
situation.
right. That was the major purpose of it. It was not punitive in nature. Now, when we fast forward to the summer of 2018, um, things are radically different. And now there's a punitive intent. So the way family separation manifested was the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice decided that they were going to enforce a law, which really shouldn't be a law for a whole nother reason, that crossing the United States, that entering without inspection is a federal misdemeanor, and that the Justice Department was going to start criminally charging people who entered without inspection. And as a result of criminally charging someone, so they're basically dad or mom is taken to jail. And because dad or mom is taken to jail and not immigration detention, that is what resulted in the separation. So the kids would end up in cages and then in these um, homes, these giant institutional homes, not like a foster home, not like a place where they get to like chill out with a family or anything like that.
Mm.
So, because the Department of Justice was prosecuting the parents, that's why the children were separated, because there is no family jail. Like, if your mom is arrested for drugs within the United States, you're not going to jail with your mom. So that's how this entire cruel scheme manifested in the United States. And it
Mm.
stopped once they decided to stop prosecuting the people who entered without inspection. So Obama wasn't prosecuting people who came in with children like right there at the border, unless they were like, there were some instances where people had re-entered multiple times. So it's when you enter without inspection, it is a crime that elevates every time you try. So every time you try, the penalty is worse. So what's different about Trump is they're prosecuting, first offenders, first time you come into the United States. you have no criminal history in the United States because you've never
Right.
been here
Okay.
before, but we're still prosecuting you. So that's how that ended up happening. So that was
Right.
the difference. So that was so there's a key difference there, and the key difference between the Obama administration and the Trump administration is the malicious intent of the Trump administration.
Right. Okay. That is thank you for clarifying. That is a very clear distinction and one that isn't really talked about enough. I mean, I think what we're kind of seeing now in the world is that there's so much going on and so much to talk about that the surface arguments are only ever presented. Um
Mm-hmm.
and it's very easy to dismiss such cruelty of the Trump administration if you, the only thing you know, as I did earlier, well, it was happening before as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so often gets spun then as a liberal attack on Donald Trump as opposed to unearthing the actual reality of the situation, which is, as you say, malicious intent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what about these cages? I mean, are they actually cages that we're talking about that children are being put in?
Well, I mean, I haven't personally seen one because I haven't personally been down there. What I can say is they are in confined confined spaces within larger spaces. I mean, I will describe to you what's been described to me as opposed to what I've seen in the media, because what we see in the media is incredibly filtered. We have to remember that whatever we see in the media is whatever the hell the Department of Homeland Security lets the media see,
Hmm.
because the media can't get in there without their permission.
Right.
So, what is described to me is like smaller, smaller spaces that, yeah, like a think of like a bigger, like a very, very large kennel for your dog, but like smaller spaces inside something that's sort of like a warehouse. And these the warehouse generally, they call it the migrants call these places hieleras, like hielo, which is the Spanish word for ice. So it's translated loosely as icebox,
Right.
um, because they're freezing cold in there. And theoretically, you're only supposed to be, if you're a child, you're not supposed to be in there very long, because there was a whole lawsuit about it that you can't keep children in that kind of custodial setting. But for a period of time, they're there. And they're there until they're transferred to these homes that are, so that kids who are separated go to homes that are like just for children. And but they are like, I mean, they're still in custody. Like, we
Yeah.
can't forget that they still have absolutely no control over their lives. Like, they still have to ask if they can go to the bathroom.
Jeez.
Um,
And do
and
they
if
receive any, I mean, education while they're in there or any contact with
Yeah, I
family?
mean, they receive, they do school, and it's interesting in that the quality of these particular homes is varies. Like, some of them uh, appear to do, like, they appear to try,
Mm.
and others, I mean, I wouldn't board my dog. Oh, I don't have a dog. I wouldn't board my sister's dead dog in. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, they do get some sort of school, if and interaction with other kids and things like that, but they don't get to talk to their parents for very long. And when they do, that's monitored. So,
Oh,
like,
wow.
yeah, that's harsh. Um, and then there are these, right now. now that family separation has mostly ended. And it's still going on to some extent because I still have children who come with people who aren't their, parents. I have children who come unaccompanied, meaning that they cross the border without a parent or without any adult, um, usually for the purpose of reunifying with a parent here in the United States. And if a child comes across the border unaccompanied, then they end up in these um, children's homes along the border. Or actually, they're not all along the border. I mean, there are a few even in New York.
New
Um,
York.
yeah, yeah. Actually, I had one kid who was actually in one in New York, and she actually said it was pretty good. Um, so so the families, like if you cross with your, like if a mother crosses with her kid, then there are the same sorts of places, but that have that allow parents and children, but they're still in custody. But it
Right,
just
yeah.
doesn't look as much like a jail or prison, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, um, and then they're either released because they pass a credible fear interview, or because they there's not enough room. Like sometimes they just, in the past, when there was a huge surge of people crossing, they would just rotate people out very, very quickly because of space.
Mm.
Um, and there was a surge of people. Oh, I think that started probably I want to say in February of 2019, and the early months of 2019, um, because there was fear that Trump was going to get the border wall up. This is so ironic. This is something that the Republicans just can't get through their thick skulls. Is the more you talk about building walls and making it impossible to get to the United States, the more people are going to come and the faster they're
Now.
going to come,
Yeah.
because they're going to be like, well, shit, we're not going to be able to get across in 2 years. Might as well come now. And so this this surge in migration from the Northern Triangle happened as a direct result of Trump promoting his wall, because people were thinking that they weren't going to get through. And people, even like, if I've interviewed some of my clients, and or some people who I've consulted with, and they're like, yeah, well, I was thinking of maybe coming in 10 years, but that wall's going to go up. I was like, better go now.
Wow.
So it really had the opposite effect of what they wanted.
Wow.
Yep. The Everything in immigration is full of strange ironies. So
What
yeah.
what are their prospects like after, say they get through the border and then their case is accepted at immigration court and they, have asylum in the United States. Are they given help after that?
Well, so there's this um, sort of purgatory between the time that these families get through the border and the time their case is decided. And the amount of time varies from state to state. So if the migrant lives in a state with a huge immigration court backlog, it could take 4 years from the time they cross the border till the time their case is decided.
Oh,
So
wow.
if they live in a place with not much backlog, it can be as fast as 18 months. So the the sad, hard, terrible truth is asylum is incredibly difficult to get, and there is so much misinformation out there in the immigrant communities about what it is and what it's for. Asylum, political asylum, the way it is now, really comes, as a result of World War II. And, you know, uh, the allies in the country really wanting to make sure that genocide doesn't happen. And so there was there are a few documents, a few seminal documents created, one in the 50s and another one that the U.S. signed on in the 60s. And the 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 participating countries, the signatories of these countries, basically all agreed on the same thing, that this is what asylum is. So, in order to win an asylum case, and this would be true, like even like the same principles apply, whether you're in the United States or Canada or the UK. You have to prove that you have that you're going to be persecuted on account of, and that's what's really important, on account of your race, your religion, your nationality, which includes your ethnicity, your political opinion, or your membership in a particular social group. So, if you cannot connect, it's a game of connect the dots. If you cannot connect your persecution, what happened to you in El Salvador, with that list, race, religion, nationality, political opinion, membership in a particular social group, you can't connect your persecution with one of those things, no asylum. And it doesn't matter really how bad your persecution was. And that's what's really sad and messed up about the whole system. So it really doesn't matter that, yeah, you're probably going to get killed if you go back home. What matters is why. So, are you going to get killed because you're a black man from Honduras married to a Latina woman? Then, yay, you win. You have asylum potentially because you can connect the fact that you can connect your persecution to race. That's a check mark. But then, even if you can connect your persecution to something on the list, you still have to prove more things. You have to prove that the government of your country cannot or will not protect you. Um, and you also have to prove that if you moved to someplace else within your country, that you wouldn't be safe. So unless it's the government that's your persecutor. So let's just say you're a black guy from the Caribbean coast of Honduras, okay, and you married a Latino woman, and you moved to her neighborhood, and people really don't like that. You suffer from ridiculous racism, not just being called the N-word and stuff, but you go to the grocery store and you're beaten within an inch of your life.
Oh.
You know, this I'm actually describing something that is very similar to something I have right now. Okay. So you are persecuted on account of race. Okay. But it's not the government itself that is his persecutors. It's the average neighborhood racist that are his persecutors. So because it's the average neighborhood racists that are his persecutors, he has to prove that if he moved somewhere else within his country, he wouldn't be safe. So he has to prove basically that if he were to move to his little region where his people are from, that they wouldn't accept his Latina wife. And he has to prove that if he lived where she is, that he would suffer. It's complicated.
How do you prove that?
With difficulty.
Yeah.
With extreme difficulty. And you use experts a lot of times, and folks cost money. You use experts, you use UN reports, um, you use reputable newspaper articles if you can find them about this, about specific things. So, so it's difficult. Another example that I use constantly when I try to explain things to my clients about how asylum works is, let's say you have a whole bunch of vendors in a market, okay, and there is a gang. Let's just say you're in MS-13 territory, okay, and MS-13 um, is extorting people in the market. But for some reason, and this never happens, by the way, this is only an example. Um, let's say MS-13 is only extorting the people of indigenous descent in the market. So you're in, Baja Verapaz, Guatemala. You're in an open air market. You are of Mayan descent, and MS-13 is extorting you, and but not extorting your vendor neighbor who is not indigenous. And MS-13 is calling you horrible racial slurs and saying that they're going to kill you if you don't give them money because you are, nasty word, nasty word, nasty word related to your indigenous
Yeah.
status. Okay, you've got persecution on account of um, race and or nationality. Good. Check mark. Great. Then you also have to prove that the government of your country cannot or will not control your persecutor. So then you have to go through this whole song and dance about how powerful MS-13 is in a particular country. And in Guatemala right now, I mean, they're really smart. Like they're infiltrating the government from the bottom up and really swaying like local elections and exerting their power locally and controlling, municipal races and um, basically buying local officials. So if your mayor or somebody won the election because MS helped them, then the police force is not going to go out and arrest the leader of MS that is extorting you. So you have to go into this whole thing about how they're like almost a quasi political party themselves,
Mm, mm.
and with their own militia. Like it's and
Would would you say that the list that you've just described is inadequate? That there are certain things that should be there that point to persecution or that are examples of persecution that are simply not highlighted?
it depends upon the interpretation because one item in that list is member of a particular social group, and that is not really defined. And that is something that me as a lawyer, that's what I do, is I try to figure out, can I put you in a particular social group?
Mm.
Can be so a particular social group, sometimes it's very easy to say, oh yeah, you're a particular social group, like if you are a trans person or a person with a disability. um, that's kind of easy, like not easy but less, let's just say less hard.
More
um,
evident, perhaps,
yeah, less
to
hard
the
to
average.
sell.
Yeah.
But if something is not as evident, then it can get difficult. And then the the hard part becomes convincing the judge that whatever you proffered really is a particular social group. By way of example,
God, and
Guatemalan
then you've
women
got
who cannot
you
leave their relationships.
God, and then you've got the like that judge's own perceptive bias potentially
Yes.
swaying one way or another. It's a completely subjective system that these people's asylum is kind of forced
Right.
into.
So then you have this other like ironic result. So one particular social group is the family. Okay. Um, so we live together. I have the last name of my father. Um, this is my spouse. We are a family. A family is a particular social group. So let's say, hypothetically, you are in El Salvador and Barrio 18 is extorting your dad for money because your dad owns a business, and anyone who owns a successful business is a target of extortion. All right, so let's say your dad is a target of extortion by one of the gangs. Um, what the way the gang enforces its extortion is rarely by hurting dad. Usually, it's by grabbing mom, beating the shit out of her, raping her, tying her up, and then leaving her in, the home for dad to find when he comes home, or kidnapping the kid. Like I have kids with like scars on their arms from being cut when they were babies by gang members, extorting their
God.
parents. I mean, just like absolutely unimaginable things, right? So
And that's not evidence enough. Scars on a
So
children's on a child's
here's where
arm.
it gets so fucked up. It's so fucked up. So the child and mom can claim that they are persecuted on account of their family relationship to dad. Okay.
Right.
Because being a family is a particular social group. Mom was persecuted because she was dad's wife. But then like what particular social group does dad belong to? Like dad's the actual recipient of like the direct victim of the extortion. So dad
Mm.
doesn't get asylum, but mom does.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh God. I mean, how do you
That's
even begin?
messed up.
Yeah. How do you even begin to address the problems in in this system? Do you think that there's a good foundation from which to rebuild? Or do you think that the US needs to look at other good, I can't actually think of any place that has a really great example of
Nobody has great. So here's my opinion is
yeah.
that um my opinion is that the reason why this particular area is seeing we are seeing such migration from the Northern Triangle in the US is in large part due to the actions and inactions that the United States took with regard to these specific countries. We had an enormous hand in the Guatemalan Civil War. Like the way we interfered with that and contributed to the indigenous genocide is really quite remarkable. Um, with these countries, the a large part of the reason why they're failing is due to actions or inactions by the United States. Honduras. Um, one thing that I will actively criticize Hillary Clinton for, and one thing that she deserves a lot of blame for, is what she did as Secretary of State with regard to Honduras and backing a coup. And she put in power just a ridiculous, horrible, corrupt human being. And
Who is that?
well, he's not in power now. But so
This is
just
his
the
name.
whole right. So the so this was in, oh my gosh, sometimes I get my histories of these three countries conflated. But yes, so there was this coup during the Obama administration while Hillary Clinton was in power. put in the president, bad dude, bad dude. Um, and at that same time,
President
uh,
Zelaya?
no, I want to say it was uh, Orlando, Juan Orlando Hernandez. But
Okay.
so um, so that I mean, she was trying to. The coup was in 2009, but what happened afterwards was really unimaginable. So in Honduras around that time, the Honduran National Police Force was was a major source of violence and corruption. After Zelaya was ousted, um, the Honduran National Police just were like, woohoo! So the new guy just couldn't get a handle on them. And in Honduras, you didn't have this situation where gangs were running around extorting people. You had a situation where the police were running around extorting people. And I mean, this was one of my earlier cases, and I didn't believe it until I actually saw it. So I have this family from Tegucigalpa, from the capital of Honduras, and they just had a very, very small business, basically like running the equivalent of a 7-Eleven. And so they were not extorted by gangs, they were extorted by the police. And they brought me this letter, and on this letter was a file stamp. Like the seal of the Honduran National Police was on this letter. And it said, it loosely translated, "Hey, motherfucker, we're the police. We're going to find you, blah, blah, blah." I mean, they shot at this guy. They beat him in the head with bricks. Um, so it was the Honduran police that were running around extorting people. It was just, I mean, it was really outrageous. And that resulted in an enormous influx of migrants from that country as a result of direct police violence. I mean, we think we have a problem with police violence here in the United States, and we most definitely do. But it is just absolutely incomparable to what has been going on historically in Honduras. So whatever Hillary tried to do, yeah, it really didn't work. And
Mm.
the result was was horrible because the government, I mean, the new leader was not was it is corrupt himself and was not able. It just let the police sort of run wild. And then there was this purge. Well, they recognized that the government of Honduras recognized that they had this huge problem with corruption. Woo woo! And so they tried to purge the police force, and that didn't work. And
Shocking.
that didn't work because even after the Great Purge, there was even after the Great Purge, um, I don't know if it was the actual guy in charge or maybe the number two, who survived the purge, was charged with international drug trafficking. Like, I mean, it's really, really outrageous. What's going on there?
Do you find that the majority of people are escaping situations like the ones that you've described, and places like Honduras with all of this violence? Because obviously we all know that immigration is brilliant for economic development, for cultural development. It's generally a win-win situation. But one of the counter arguments to immigration is, people are going to take advantage of the system of immigration or the system of asylum. People that don't need asylum, the quote unquote bad guys, dangerous people, are going to come in and take advantage of the situation. It's a common counter argument. It's one Trump even used
Sure.
in his presidential
Sure.
bid 4 years ago. What is your experience of it?
So I think that about 75% of the people who come to see me um, are fleeing legitimate violence, are fleeing something, are fleeing danger that they can't control in any way in their home country. And I'm not talking about just generalized country conditions. I'm talking about specific threats to them. Okay. Because,
Right.
um, you know, when I ask people, why are you afraid to go back? And if they tell me, well, it's, there's no work and it's a dangerous country, that's about 25% of the people. The other
Right.
75% tell me a very personal story about how they were targeted for violence. A lot of times for women, it's domestic violence. For children, it's interfamily violence. And for a lot of other people, it's just it's violence at the hands of the police or sometimes government officials, but in most cases, gang-based violence.
Wow.
So most people do have, and this is not everybody, but I would say most people do have a legitimate fear of return. And what is difficult is to try to put their very legitimate fear of return, which is a very round, fluid thing, it's a round, fluid experience, into the square peg of
Yeah.
asylum. So
Yeah.
I have to frame it in a way that fits within the law.
Yeah.
Um, and the people who don't have, a targeted fear of return, that's, as I said, that's not as often, but usually they're fleeing, widespread poverty. For women in particular, um, I haven't talked about gender enough in this context. For women in particular, it is very, very difficult to get on in these countries if you are a woman. If you are a single woman and you are living without a man, that is considered to be socially taboo unless you
Mm.
are of the elite upper class. And even then, it's considered a little socially taboo. Um, it is the protections for women against domestic violence exist on paper but are not enforced in practice. Women tell me stories of being not just, like what I would think of domestic violence, is just what most of my female clients would just consider Tuesday.
Yeah.
Like, domestic violence that these women experience is on a level of egregiousness that, my North American mind cannot, I can't wrap my head around some of the things that happen to these women. And I don't even like to call it domestic violence, because that's not what it is. It's domestic torture.
Oh God.
These women are not victims of violence. They are victims of actual torture. Um, and they can't get away. There's this whole horrible dynamic whereby men are unable to let it go. If it's the man's choice to end a relationship, then there's not often a lot of danger to the woman. But if it's the woman's choice, that hurts the man's ego, that hurts the man's reputation in the community. It wounds his masculinity to the point where the only way he can regain it is by hurting the woman, or by very often killing her. The whole concept of machismo and
Yeah.
how that relates to dominance and masculinity, and men cannot be seen as weak, and they have to prove their masculinity on a constant basis. And for a woman to leave a man, or for a man to be perceived in his community as being in any way controlled by a woman, that will weaken him in his community's eyes. So the way that um, men assert their assert their dominance and assert their place with other men is through violence, and not what we
It's
it's not what
difficult
I,
for us to
what my friends
comprehend.
experience, like,
Yeah,
a typical, like, punch in the face,
yeah.
or something like that. Like, it's the stories that I have heard would be considered torture if in any other context, in contexts that were not done by domestic partners.
Okay, then I want to just swing back to something we discussed a little bit earlier, um, about the 75% versus 25%.
Mm-hmm.
25% of people that maybe just, are looking for a better situation, which is obviously also, in my eyes, a perfectly fine thing to do. I mean, if you look at Europe, we're all just moving around trying to find, the place where we want to be. Um, but there's obviously no place for that machismo culture in Western Anglo culture. It's completely contrary to feminism. It's completely contrary, I mean, to one's own bodily autonomy and rights to self govern, one's own sovereignty. So how do we deal with the problem of immigration when it comes to cultural clashes, to getting people into safety, but also ensuring that no part of that culture that doesn't fit with ours, and maybe one that we've already ironed out, how do we make sure to manage that, to not invite
Well,
the wrong things in?
well, by education, and that's that's it, by education. Like, if domestic violence is just so pervasive in these countries that, and it's because it's socially, I don't want to say it's socially accepted, but yeah, that's um, that might not be a politically correct thing to say, but I'm just, based upon my experience and the women that I see, um, what these women believe their duties are with regard to their domestic partners, and what I believe my duties are to my domestic partners, which, I don't have any. Um, but let's say hypothetically I had one. Like, you're doing your own laundry, you're cooking your own food, and if you want the house cleaned, hire a damn maid. Um, I mean, that's not how it works in 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 Latin culture, and that's just because our cultures are different. And I think that if we educate men and women and say, here in the United States, you can and will go to jail for hitting a woman. And hitting a woman means any contact that she doesn't actively consent to. And then you go to the women and you say, in the United States, you have these rights. You don't have to have sex with your husband if you don't want to. In fact, it's actually illegal for your husband to make you have sex with him if you don't want to. Um, that surprises so many people when I
Yeah,
tell them that, because, like, women, will tell me, will disclose what are in actuality rapes, but they don't say that. But, like, but we're married.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like, I understand, but here you can't. Here in the United States, you can't rape your wife. Really?
Mm,
No, you don't. No, no, you can't rape your wife. You can't rape your girlfriend. No, we have laws against that. Um,
mm.
so if you actually just go through and explain that, and then you, through some education, I think that will help a lot. And if men understand that we enforce these laws, it's not just that they're on the books, that we enforce them. And women understand, this is where you go, this is the number you call, this is what will happen, these are the shelters and places that you can go. If both sides understand that there are these resources available, just by virtue of the fact that laws against domestic violence are enforced here in the United States, I think that maybe it's ignorant of me, but I think that in some way reduces it here. So believe me, it does not work all the time. I have many, many clients, where I represent many, many clients who come to me, who are migrant women who are victims of domestic violence in the United States, and they just don't know what to do. Um, so I think that's how you deal with that part of
I
it.
mean, education is at its core potentially the solution to every possible
Yeah,
societal and cultural problem that we can think of. And if it was only taken more seriously, maybe we wouldn't be facing such issues. And if people were given support once they arrive as well, and given genuine education, and education is also about, exactly as you're saying, hey, these are your rights here, this is what you are allowed to do, and this is what you're allowed to say no to. It's incredibly empowering, but unfortunately, I don't know, it's just not something that's particularly done well anywhere. Education.
that's
um
true.
yeah, listen, I want to wrap up on a potentially harrowing end, or a harrowing question. It depends on your
Okay.
answer. How many of these people, these 75%, these beaten women and scared children and extorted men, how many of them are sent back into that situation?
Well, right now, like in 2020, um, I'm gonna have to give you a guess, and that's because very few cases of mine have been adjudicated. I started doing this um, during the Trump administration. I switched practice areas during the Trump administration because I knew that this was going to be the area that needed the most help. So not many of my cases have been adjudicated, but um, the statistics now are incredibly bad. And I mean, there are national averages that you can, I'm sure, find, and they're based upon a variety of factors. But um, migrants from the Northern Triangle, I think maybe right now this year, maybe 1 in 50 is actually going to win their asylum claim.
1 in 50 is going to win their asylum.
Yeah, about 1 in 50 right now. So my
That,
hope,
hang on, I'm terrible at math, but that's like 2%, right?
yeah, it's not good.
Oh
It's
my
really,
God. And
it's
this
yeah,
is
it's
women, kids, and
yeah, yeah, asylum is incredibly, incredibly difficult to get.
yeah.
And we're having this crisis in large part due to due to US interference in this region. So, my hope for fixing it is that we grant temporary protected status to the people who are here. Um, and especially since the region is just being decimated by natural disasters right now. And I think that is so underreported in the media. I mean, we had this horrible volcanic explosion in Guatemala with fuego, and these hurricanes that are key. I mean, it's South America is going to be an island because I think Honduras and El Salvador are pretty much all underwater right now, except for the mountains. Like it's bad. Um, so when you understand how just environmentally devastated this region is, um, we're going to potentially be seeing even more migration. So what we have to do is we have to grant protections to the people to our the people who are here, and do something similar to like a Marshall Plan for the region to help stimulate its economic growth, so that there are jobs in this region that even women can get. There are sustainable jobs available. There's international investment, and so that people won't feel like so women won't feel like they have to accept the fact that they're probably going to get raped in order to come into the United States and maybe find a job that will allow them to eat.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So I I think that there definitely needs to be some changes to our asylum laws, but that's not the fix. The fix is not in just changing the asylum laws. The fix is in making some sort of reparations for the damage that we did going back to the 50s, honestly, in this region, and trying to assist these governments in expelling corruption and being self-sustaining and encouraging foreign investment and helping these countries become places where the people can flourish and the people can have control over their own government. Uh, and I think that's really the answer right now. I think, there, as I said, we definitely need to make a few changes to the asylum laws, and those changes, in my mind, would be we need to follow the UN handbook and what the UNHCR says really should go. Um, and I think that would help a lot. But the major problem is the United States and other countries just allowing Central America to just collapse in on itself and not paying any attention to the environmental damage that the collective world is contributing to Central America. I mean, it's not like they burn a whole heck of a lot of fossil fuel down there, you know?
Yeah. 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 That's a really, really, really good point. Yeah.
And yet they're the ones who are underwater right now, a
Yeah.
lot of water right now. So I think we have to really, really look at that. And hopefully in 20 or 30 years, um, you know, we can, go on vacation to the Caribbean coast of Honduras without any fear. And because
Yeah.
it's like, everybody tells me it's just so beautiful. And, and these, the people will want to stay in these countries and they will want to stay
Yeah.
with their families. And
And
that's
they'll be able
that's my
to.
hope. And they'll be able
Yeah.
to. And that's my hope. That's my hope is that Biden understands this and appoints people to his cabinet who understand this as well.
Okay. Well, Alina, thank you so much for your knowledge, for your expertise, and also for the work that you're doing for these asylum seekers coming through the Northern Triangle.
Thank you for
Really.
asking about it. And thank you for asking about it because I think a lot of folks in Europe side um, get little snapshots of what's going on here in the US, but it's hard to put together.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One thing I do to finish up is always to ask if there's someone that you would like to platform, somebody perhaps who's doing good work in your field, or somebody I don't
My God, there's
know.
so many. There's so many. Like there are so many justice warriors out there. So just there, I mean, it's kind of an it's kind of an endless list. Here in Virginia, the immigration attorneys at the Legal Aid Justice Center are absolutely amazing. The people who volunteered to go down to the border, I couldn't because I just had too much work to do in Richmond that I couldn't go. I mean, are amazing. There's so many people out there. I mean, that are doing such amazing
Yeah.
things. I work in collaboration with the Sacred Heart Center of Richmond, Virginia. And the Sacred Heart Center of Richmond, Virginia is a community center that provides help and provides all sorts of programs from English classes to citizenship classes, And it also has the Family Protection Project. And the Family Protection Project is the program that I work with, and that helps families stay together by helping fund at least partially their immigration defense in immigration court. So that's the Sacred Heart Center of Richmond, Virginia.
And
And
people can make donations to that, right?
yes, people can make donations to that. They're an absolutely wonderful organization. It is really the lifeblood of this community. I live a block away from the center. And the Family Protection Project in particular is what is helping me help these folks. And it's the whole reason why I don't turn away a family or stop representing a family for their inability to pay.
Yeah.
And that is a value of mine that is very important to me, and that I'm only able to keep through donations, because we should not return a family to their death just because they can't pay a lawyer.
Yeah.
So that's ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
And the Sacred Heart Center really helps me do that.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. I'll
Well,
be sure
thank
to look them
you.
up and make a donation.
That would be
Yeah, thank you.
fantastic. And if you can even
Yeah,
say in that there's a like a little memo box that about the Family Protection Project, that would be great.
I will. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Alina, again. That was
Thank you so much,
so
Rachel. I
interesting.
appreciate it.
No
You have a good
problem.
one.
You too. Hi, everyone. You can find the link to the Sacred Heart Centre in the show notes. There's also information on their website about how to donate to them if you wish. As ever, thank you for supporting the podcast. I would love to know what you think about it, so do leave a review. And if you enjoy it, please give the show a 5-star rating. It really helps increase our visibility and the visibility of the phenomenal people we speak to every week. Just a quick reminder as well, for the newsletter, you can go to stories.platformenterprise.com to sign up for original reporting every week and support both it and this podcast. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.